is a doyen. He has been a teacher of teachers. So when Dr. Paul in his interview mentions Dr. Vinod Bhutani has taught him in Stanford, he has notes from the time when he was there in Stanford. He has taken notes, and that is the kind of sir contribution you have made to the newborn health movement of India.
This takes me back to a time when I just graduated from Armed Forces Medical College in Pune, and I had been assigned an internship at Safdarjung Hospital in New Delhi, because that's the only place one could go and get a training for us ex-AFMC graduates while you were in Delhi. And it was my luck that I met Dr. Shanti Ghosh and worked with her in her pediatric unit. And that is where I met Dr. Bhargav, Santosh Bhargav, who helped found the National Neonatology Forum. After I completed my MD, I came to the US because I'd fallen in love with neonatology while working with Dr. Shanti Ghosh. And I wanted to learn the academia and what was happening in the world of neonatology, so that I landed in the US. And those circumstances were such that, as when you come to the US, you have to repeat your residency, you have to repeat your fellowship. And what I experienced in neonatology was a complete diversity of opinions and difference of those that were being practiced in India. And so I decided to do a PhD in physiology at that time as a part of my training. It was while I was doing that and I was visiting India that Dr. Shanti Ghosh and Dr. Bhargav mentioned about the meeting that was going to take place in Pune, or one of the earliest NNF meetings. And I attended that meeting. And in addition to meeting and being inspired by Dr. Shanti Ghosh, I met another obstetrician who was, in those days, obstetricians were invited to the National Neonatology Forum. And I met Dr. Banu Koyaji. At that stage, she was in her 70s, and she was inspirational. And I continued to work with her over the years. And when she was in her mid-80s, I asked her, among my many visits, and she said, I asked her, what keeps you going? Because things in India were pretty horrific, actually, and we'll talk about them at that time. And she said, eternal optimism. And in this meeting today, I remember those words so vividly, because if it wasn't for the fact that we were eternally optimistic, we would not have seen the depth and breadth of National Neonatology Forum and how you all have changed neonatology in India. All right. So those are inspiring words and led me to my work and interaction with all my colleagues and friends that I made throughout India in neonatology. The singular incident that comes to my mind, that following my visit to Pune at NNF, I decided to come to India during my vacation time. Every year you have 4 weeks of vacation in the US. So I would take my vacation, come to meet my family in India, and I would decide to go out and interact with various individuals. So I'd been through a few nurseries, which were very similar to the ones that I had left back in Safdarjung Hospital. And one of the most frequent questions that I was asked was, what is a drug and how do you treat neonatal seizures? I was very perplexed because in the US, we were not treating and seeing that many neonatal seizures, but this was a huge problem in India in the various nurseries. Then suddenly it struck me, because I'd just been to the delivery room, and the person who had asked me that question at a meeting, I said, what do you do during resuscitation? You don't have an ambu bag or a bag to manually ventilate a baby. How do you resuscitate? And they were doing what we were doing 6 years earlier, at Safdarjung Hospital, and that was by resuscitating by an intravenous injection of sodium bicarbonate. That was a way of resuscitation back in 1979, 1980, and then also in 1982 when this happened. And I said, you can't do that anymore. Have you not heard the work of Usher in Canada, who completely said that giving bicarbonate, especially full strength bicarbonate, was a hypertonic effect and would have negative consequences on the brain. But unless you remove the carbon dioxide in an asphyxiated baby, you're going to cause a problem. So nobody had seen an ambu bag or a Mapleson. That was not part of the neonatal resuscitation scheme, which was standard of care here in the US. I found that unacceptable. They said, all you need to do is to go to your engineering college, have them make you a one-way valve and connect it to an inflatable bag, and you can ventilate a baby, okay? That's where I realized that I had to focus on physiology and technology, all right? That's what got me started. And this process led me to invite my colleagues from Canada at the first neonatal ventilation workshop that Dr. Guha had arranged in Delhi at his hospital. And I said, if I'm going to teach ventilation, I have to teach resuscitation. So I invited my good friends, Dr. Nalini Singhal from Calgary, who then ran a workshop because I was familiar with the American Academy of Pediatrics' new neonatal resuscitation program that was just being taken off and being developed. It wasn't called the neonatal resuscitation program, it was called NALS or something like that. And so we ran a workshop that gave a 6-hour workshop on the steps to take in neonatal resuscitation. That is now standard, all right? And the reaction was, oh my God, why do we have to learn 8 hours for resuscitation, right? Everybody rejected that. But there were some, the younger crowd said, this makes sense because it's a stepwise protocol, all right? That began our journey with Dr. Paul and Dr. Meherban Singh, my dear friend, Dr. Vidya Sagar, to launch the National Neonatal Resuscitation Program. And that was main part of the workshop in the mid-80s throughout the US. Who himself was doing his work with his colleagues, with Dr. Meherban Singh, and we joined forces. And I said, we have to teach physiology, the basis of science, introduce technology, and train the leaders of the country into the new way of thinking of neonatology as a new discipline. And Dr. Vidyasagar was holding annual courses in the US on neonatology. He would run a 7-day course, all right? And so with him and I, through our own funds, we invited the leaders of NNF, of various academic units, and we introduced them to modern day neonatology. And I focused on the younger generation because they were really smart. And Dr. Paul, as you know, was the smartest of them all. And so he was our first student, and that's where we worked together. And what Dr. Paul did was he took notes. He understood the protocols. For Neonatology Forum, we began the building of protocols. And most importantly, we said we have to train nurses because without the hands of the nurses, we could not implement 24-hour care in the nurseries. So the first set of nurses that came to the US was from Ames. And my nurse, Anne Schwabel, who spent her own vacation and money to come to India, train the initial set of nurses. And then we got nurses from PGI. And more importantly, Dr. Diarari took the mantle. He was a young man in those days with a lot of energy. And then he took the mantle on neonatal nursing and went to Canada to work with Dr. Nalini Singhal's group so that we spread out the training of all the Indian colleagues all over the US. And we were very privileged in the late 1990s to train and work and collaborate with leaders from all over India. And that's why all of them are such dear friends. So there were many, many, many such instances. You know, I was the first one to smuggle a neonatal ventilator to India. You could bring a ventilator, and I brought it in my bag, but I declared it at the customs. It took me a whole 2 days sitting at the Delhi airport customs to navigate, to be able to get the machine out so that I could convince the customer that this was a life-saving equipment and therefore it was okay to bring it into India because it was life-saving. All right. That is the first ventilator that I brought to Hyderabad, Nilafar Hospital. And then others came. And many people learned to bring a lot of different disposable equipments to help individuals. I think the most horrific moment was going into where you have special care nursery units now and finding delivery rooms that were in a very horrific situation. The labor rooms were terrible. All right. The labor room was a flat stainless steel table on which the mother laid and delivered a baby with very limited linen and comfort. Usually a very cold room with metallic instruments and no place to resuscitate. The other thing that we found in these places, that right from the British days, they had a room right next to the delivery room, which is a completely dark room, which was called the eclampsia room. They would place the mothers in this dark room because they didn't want a lot of stimulation, and made sense back in the 1940s. But now, in the 1980s and 70s, there was no eclampsia anymore because they were getting good obstetrical care as could be provided. It was rare to see eclampsia. And those rooms were used as storage and nothing else, because they had a big sign on it, eclampsia room, and nobody used it. It was empty. And we said, can we have this for resuscitation in an SCNU? All right. That's where the whole concept of developing SCNU started, that there was space, there was real estate in the delivery room, and that we could utilize that space and claim it for the neonatologist and the pediatrician. So the transition of the labor rooms, the photographs that you see in history, they were frightening. They were sad, right? And they were a remnant of the British Empire. And we changed that in the 80s and the 90s. So people like leaders that you've had and presidents who took on the SNU concept and bring quality care to the US was a very important step in my mind, that we could do things at SCNUs. To me, that was a phenomenal success for India and for NNF. It has changed the fabric of India. When then we went to the villages and we felt that we could actually bring care that was possible at an international level to a village in India. My thought in 1999, at the turn of the century, was that a baby born in a village in California should have the same outcome and get the same care as a baby in a village in India. Okay, that was my plan. That was my mission that I undertook. I sent a team to Munnar in Kerala of residents from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Munnar, the tea estate, has 24 villages that were beautifully networked, all right, from way back when. and had a good healthcare system, and the delivery rooms were being managed by the midwives. My residents stayed there for 3 months and trained the midwives on the neonatal resuscitation program. All right. And Dr. Sudhendra, who was the pediatrician in charge working with me, was assigned in that at Bonar unit, and he helped train these individuals. And it was phenomenal how successful it was, and renewed my thought that if we could work with midwives, you know, train them more than being traditional birth attendants, that we could advance resuscitation throughout India. And that was the impetus to try and get primary rural care being delivered throughout. The beginnings of that program we did with the University of Pennsylvania, and that formed the basis of the RBSK program, and then became the huge current program that it is. But an initiative that you can train people who are not scientifically trained, but were working at the front line, and teach them protocols that can make a difference. Many years ago, before the new century began, I brought Dr. Anne Stark, who wrote the Manual of Neonatal Care, to India. And during her visit, I have a photograph of 7 leading neonatology women of India. I mean, Dr. Jayam was one of them, but by that time she wasn't there. But all the 7 who were there, Simin Irani, Armida Fernandez, Shashivani, and others, there were 7 of them. And I said, these are the steel magnolias of India meeting the steel magnolia of the US. Dr. Anne Stark just got the Virginia Apgar Award from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Sushma Nangia is the current steel magnolia of India. So the first thing, the most important thing, I shared knowledge, and people allowed me to share knowledge. The second was to open doors to the nurseries, open doors to professional organizations like the AAP and the PAS, and open doors to academia. I mean, the academic productivity from India is mind-boggling. Indians have contributed to academia worldwide. So you look at any paper, any good paper, there's always an Indian in that team, all right? Often under-recognized, often undervalued, but there's an Indian in that paper, and you know that they were working damn hard, all right? So it's individuals who became academicians and who led their own fields, like you did with SNU. So I think I contributed in every step of the way of the disciplines of resuscitation, ventilation, sepsis management, and hygiene. I learned about breastfeeding from Dr. Jayam in India and brought the Paladay Cup to the US. That was my first technology transfer. I said, before I bring technology to India, let me take something from India to the US. All right. So bilateral exchanges. It has been a simple exercise of collaboration. It was not me teaching people because I was learning at the same time. We were trying to promote the promise of neonatal care, yet also promote the academics of neonatal care. And with that, you bring in integrity, you bring in national pride, you bring in national value. And the contribution that the Indian neonatologists trained at centers like AIMS, PGI, Gangaram Hospital, Chennai, and elsewhere in Bangalore and Kerala, all of these individuals have contributed, whether they stayed in India or went outside, to Indian neonatology. So the forum that we have of Indian neonatologists worldwide is an incredible resource. I mean, there is a WhatsApp, which should be, through the NNF. is really a phenomenal forum where through social networking that individuals are connected, because you can take care of the same healthcare system in India as you can anywhere else. You don't have to be born in Australia or Britain or in the US to get the best healthcare. You are there right now to get good healthcare for neonates in India. And that, to me, has been able to create a platform of collegiality and collaboration. And that's what your organization represents. That's a very interesting story, and it relates back to India. You know, being at Safdarjung Hospital, and those who work there know, like any private, any public hospital in India, you see the worst cases possible that can happen. While at Safdarjung Hospital, it was not unusual for me to see connectress and neonatal tetanus. Neonatal tetanus is no longer seen. We would see pseudomonas sepsis. We don't see that anymore. So back in mid 1990s, when I was at the height of my ventilation work and career, and I was doing pulmonary functions, my colleague in my unit, Dr. Lois Johnson, asked me to help produce a documentary on children with connectress that she was seeing in the US. She felt there was a reemergence of connectress in the US. By reemergence, when she had seen 8 cases of connectress, and she was above the moon for that. All right. So these 8 families, we met and we did a documentary. I was taken aback that there was connectress in the US. All right. And I said to myself, here I am resuscitating and saving babies at 24 weeks of gestation. And people are talking about going down to 23 weeks. All right. I said, I can do that, but there are only a few number of babies who are 23 weeks that I can take care of. But think of the children with connectors that I see in India when I would visit India. All right. And I felt I had to do something differently. That's when I switched. All right. That was an epiphany for me to say that in the developing world, connectors is going to be there forever unless we do something. And Lois Johnson had started at a practice in our place of doing a bilirubin test on every baby before they went home. It was only at our institution in entire America. So we had collected the data for about a year, and I went back and said, no, let's collect this scientifically. And that's how we came up with a nomogram, because I wanted to look at what is a normal value for bilirubin. And we learned that it was a question of the age in hours, and that you could rank it by percentiles. So that's when I started to draw lines statistically, and I brought it down to 3 simple lines, because I had to make the nomogram simple for people to understand that bilirubin is rising. It is rising by the hour of age, that in the first 72 hours, that it matters as to how high that bilirubin is. And what we learned was it was predictive of what was going to happen. That was our first paper in 1999. It took me 2 years to write that paper because there was so much of data and there's so many different ways. And I wanted to distill it down to its simplicity. And that's what helped change the practice in the US. That now every baby is tested universally for a bilirubin before they go home. And now that we can not only screen, but with consensus, and that's what the new guidelines is. You don't have to screen, just do the test, and then you can decide when to treat. All right. So that's the leap of the new guidelines, is that you can treat the baby on that single test, that you know how it's going to go. So depending on where it is from the threshold, you can determine the follow-up. But if it wasn't for the fact, for me at least, that I took my physiology knowledge and pulmonary knowledge into bringing into the bilirubin world and trying to make it simple, just as handbagging, manual ventilation is the simplest form of ventilation, that these are simple techniques and we can do them not only in the most sophisticated centers, but also do them at primary care at the front line. And that's what we're doing now with phototherapy. So that's a very provocative question, Sushma. I love Neonatology Forum. I've seen it from the very first year that it was born. I think when I turned around 18 years of age, like any other adolescent wanting to become an adult, and then I've had a temper tantrum, and it went through a little rough patch. And the new set of leaders that have come preceding you, whether Siddharth Ramji and Praveen, they've helped engineer and re-engineer NNF, not only to its former glory, but to its new horizon, that it's a worldwide global organization that has been respected for what it has done to neonatology. When we first started neonatology work in India, nobody was doing this kind of work from Western countries to India. Okay. People in cardiology followed our example. People in orthopedics followed our example. So now you see a lot of exchange programs between cardiologists and orthopedics and liver surgeons. But we were the first people to do it, right? Because babies are important to us. We're advocating for babies no matter where they are born. So that's my answer to you, is that you guys are at the pinnacle of spreading the word across the world, not only for the care that you provide at the primary care level for the 1.2 billion Indians, but also to the quality of care that you provide so that it meets academic and international standards. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. We have done well, all right? Given the heritage that we got from the British leftover colonial empire, we have done in an outstanding manner to rise up. So to me, the futures are the people who have their DMs and DNBs in India. They're the advocates for the babies born in India. They are the academicians for the babies born in India, and they're going to advance care. We don't have all the answers yet. Okay. The work has just begun. All right. We need to approach these things diligently, seriously, with dedication, and with integrity and honesty. Yes, there's a business component, and we have to make our discipline survive so that it's of value to the society, not value to our personal, but value to the society. And I think as long as we are remain honorable, truthful, and with integrity, there's nothing that we cannot do. If we can go to the moon, we can save the sickest babies and reunite a family that has a sick child. That's my hope. Thank you.
Phoenix. Enabling life.